For the past 2 years, I've served as a mortician in a quaint town's funeral home. This role has brought me immense satisfaction. I immerse myself in audiobooks, enjoy a supportive boss, and find solace among the deceased. Their silence is a welcome contrast to the clamor of the living. Preparing bodies for their final rest feels like a profound act of respect and a meaningful service to our community. Without a doubt, this has been the most fulfilling job I've ever held. That is, until the arrival of the smiling corpses. It began, I believe, about 3 weeks ago, though time has taken on an odd quality since this started. Initially, only 1 or 2 bodies arrived with peculiar expressions, but soon the numbers grew and the situation began to unravel. To clarify, I'm aware that on occasion, the deceased may exhibit slight smiles. Some individuals naturally have features that rest in a gentle, happy expression. At times, we even adjust their lips subtly to present a more familiar, lifelike appearance, softening the stark visage of death. However, these particular bodies were different. They bore wide, unnatural grins, stretching the lifeless skin to the very corners of their mouths. The first body arrived on a chilly, rain-soaked day. Her name was Amber, a 31-year-old woman, significantly younger than the individuals I typically handled. She had succumbed to an unexpected blood clot. While I took pride in my profession, working with younger descendants was always challenging. Before even opening the body bag, thoughts of the young children she might have left behind, her aging parents mourning their daughter, and friends and family grieving a life cut short flooded my mind. I pushed these reflections aside and prepared to begin my work. Switching on the light, I positioned the steel table closer and grasped the zipper of the body bag. However, as I unzipped it, I was taken aback. Amber's face bore a smile. Her lips pressed firmly together, concealing her teeth, with the corners of her mouth sharply turned upward. Such an expression would require deliberate muscle engagement, even in life. I quickly opened the rest of the bag. There was no doubt she was deceased. Her skin was pale as marble, eyes closed, lips tinged blue. The impossible smile. What the hell? My heart hammered as I stared at her face, my breath catching in my throat. Maybe, could she somehow still be alive? Hands trembling, I gently touched her lips, then her cheeks. Her skin was cold, so cold it made my fingers ache. I reached into the body bag, gripping her bony wrist, and felt for a pulse. Nothing, no movement, no life. If I weren't a mortician, I might have shrugged it off. People die with expressions sometimes, right? But I knew better. When someone dies, their facial muscles relax completely. If rigor mortis has set in, the body stiffens in a neutral expression, not a smile. This wasn't just unnatural, it was impossible. My head spun, the clinical part of my brain battling the growing knot of unease in my stomach. There was no way she could be alive. But there was also no way she could be smiling like that. I called my boss, Alan, into the embalming room. He paused in the doorway, his expression shifting from confusion to unease as he took in the sight of her face. "That's not normal," he muttered. "No kidding," I replied, gesturing toward the unnerving grin that stretched across her face. "That's not rigor. That's not anything I've seen before." Alan crouched closer, inspecting her features. "Maybe it's a deformity," he suggested. "A condition that made her muscles naturally set like this?" I shook my head. "No way. That kind of expression requires active tension in the muscles. Once someone dies, that tension disappears. Even if she had been smiling when she died, it wouldn't look like this." The grin on her face seemed wider now, her lips sealed tight, almost as though it was hiding something. "Do you think it's the coroner?" Alan asked after a moment. "Maybe he's doing this, trying to make the bodies look less dead?" That idea gave me a moment of hope. Jack, the coroner, was eccentric, always a bit too enthusiastic about his work. It wasn't entirely out of the realm of possibility, but even that theory didn't sit right. Even if he did it, the smile would fade by the time they got here, I said. Muscles can't hold that position without active tension, and the way her lips are stretched, it doesn't even seem human. Alan didn't have a response to that. He just muttered something under his breath and excused himself to call Jack. When he came back, his face was pale, his jaw clenched tight. "Jack says she wasn't smiling," Alan said grimly. "She wasn't smiling when he finished the autopsy." We stared at each other for a long moment. Then we both turned to look at her. The smile had grown wider. Dread engulfed me, as if a torrent of icy water had been unleashed over me. So, the smile appeared after her death, during the transport from the coroner? That's inconceivable, I murmured, my voice trembling. Who else had access to the body? He shook his head. No one should have had access except us, the coroner, and the transport personnel. Damn, we made several more inquiries to police officers, medical examiners, even a few EMTs, but no one had any insight. The coroner confirmed that the body had been securely stored post-autopsy. It seemed the body remained untampered. Perhaps it was peculiar to Amber, a congenital condition, some rare disorder causing her mouth to form a smile hours after death. It defied logic, but what alternative was there? To suggest a demon had possessed her corpse to make it smile, that a ghost was manipulating her facial muscles? Nothing added up. What should I do with her? I asked Alan. Set her features as usual, he replied. Inform me if anything else unusual occurs. He then turned and departed. I complied. After pacing the room to steady my nerves, I approached the body. Placing my index and middle fingers at the corners of her mouth, I swiftly pressed downward. Odd, something felt amiss. I probed her cheeks, perplexed. Typically, cheeks are supple, with the underlying bones providing structure. Yet hers felt uniformly firm, as if possessing an internal framework. Had she undergone cosmetic procedures like fillers or Botox? I examined further, only to grow more bewildered. Something was off about the alignment of her bones and facial muscles beneath the skin. I called Alan back. Does her face feel unusual to you? He assessed her face, frowning. Slightly, he conceded, but not excessively. Could be due to plastic surgery. That's what I thought. Hey, maybe that's why she's smiling. I mean, it's possible, I guess, he replied. Then he left, and I was back to setting her features all alone in the morgue. My fingers worked over her cold skin quickly, trying to get the whole thing over with as fast as possible. But the more I worked, the more time I spent with her alone in this room, the more panicked I became. Suddenly I felt dizzy. I couldn't breathe, couldn't get enough oxygen. My legs felt weak underneath me. I was on the verge of a panic attack. I stepped away from the body, forced myself to take a deep breath. Name 5 things you can see, I told myself. Cabinets, hand sanitizer, scissors, linens, and Amber's dead body. This grounding technique wasn't quite as effective when I was in the morgue room. I'd never had a panic attack here before. The bodies had never bothered me like this. I was always able to dissociate it from the person who lived in it. I was always able to convince myself it was just dead flesh, just something left behind, no different than the strands of hair and dead skin we leave behind when we're alive. But this time was different. The grotesque grin, pushing my fingers hard into her flesh, forcing her mouth to turn down. Something deep inside me snapped. I took a few more minutes to collect myself, taking in deep, calming breaths. Then I forced myself to continue working. I walked over to the cabinet, got out the clear thread, and started to sew her mouth shut. You had to, otherwise their mouth would loll open and look weird. I'd forgotten to do it once, and it was the only time Alan yelled at me. But as I worked on the stitches, I couldn't stop picturing Amber's grin, and I felt like there was more resistance from her lips than there should have been. Or was I imagining it? The needle slipped against my fingers, but I forced myself to keep going, even though my heartbeat was ratcheting up again. I ran a comb through her dyed blonde hair, arranging it with my hands. I swirled a brush into pressed powder and swept across her cheeks, her forehead, her nose. I chose a nice, natural, peach-colored lipstick and applied it to her lips. Then I was done. I put the final touches on her face, poking and prodding here and there, and then it was over. I stepped back and gave her a final look. Honestly, I'd done a pretty great job. Her expression was perfectly peaceful. She almost looked like she was asleep. Then I left the room to grab the pair of earrings that the family left for her. As soon as I put them in, I'd be done, and I'd never have to look at this woman ever again. I grabbed them from the office, then hurried back to the morgue. Amber was smiling again. "Alan?" I shouted. The floor spun underneath me. I heard Alan's footsteps behind me, quickly approaching. I was losing my balance. I stumbled over to the wall and leaned against it, trying not to fall. I set her features, I told him. I stitched her mouth shut, and she's grinning again. Alan stood there frozen, his mouth hanging open, his brown skin ashen. Without a word, he walked into the room, looking over her. For several seconds, he didn't say anything. "I've never seen anything like this," he said finally. I joined him at her side, looked down at her awful smiling face. I noticed one of the stitches had snapped. A piece of clear thread trailed out of her mouth. It couldn't be Ben playing with us, could it?" I asked. I wished it was. With all my being, I wished this was some ridiculous prank and not the body moving on its own. Ben was the other mortician. He was considerably younger than me and Alan, only 21, and heavily influenced by social media. He was always filming something or talking about some TikTok challenge he'd done. It was nauseating. "I think not. He should prepare the other body. However, we can actually look at the security film." Alan had introduced surveillance cameras in each room of the burial service home after somebody had broken in over the mid-year. I followed him down the foyer, feeling improved with each step I put among myself and Golden. He took a seat at the work area and pulled up the security film. I paused my breathing as he hit play. I watched the screen as I dealt with Golden's body in the grainy high-contrast film. I looked as I left to get the hoops. The entryway swung shut. 1 second passed, 2, and afterward it worked out. The edges of Golden's mouth yanked up, like they were joined to fishing line that had, out of nowhere, been pulled tight. "What on God's green earth?" Alan said. That can't occur, can it?" I asked, my voice shaking. "No, it's basically impossible that can occur. Dead bodies move after death, once in a while. Jerking is normal, brought about by the arrival of synthetic substances left over in sensitive spots. Decay can likewise make the body move. I'd peruse an article about a man whose arms had extended directly at his sides weeks after death due to disintegration. In any case, this wasn't decay, since she'd been apparently put away appropriately since her passing. Furthermore, this was certainly not an irregular jerk by the same token. It was a smile. I'd understand someplace in some moving article someplace that it took just 12 muscles to grin and a lot more to grimace. That implied each of the 12 of Golden's facial muscles were working in show, making and holding a grin. It had neither rhyme nor reason. Alan rewound the recording, playing the recording again and again, murmuring to himself about meticulousness mortis and other clinical language. However, I was unable to stay there and continue to watch it. Each time I saw that smile yank up once more, I felt like I could upchuck. I passed on the workplace and rushed back to the funeral home. I needed to get rid of Golden. Furthermore, she would be tomorrow first thing when we drove her to the graveyard. In any case, this all would be gone and done with by 11 a.m. tomorrow. All I needed to do was set her face once more, load her into one of the refrigerated cupboards, and my task was finished. At the point when I opened the entryway, I found Ben remaining over Golden's carcass. "Whoa," he said as I strolled in. "What'd you do to this one?" "Nothing, she came that way. Truly, what's going on with her?" "Nothing, as far as anyone is concerned. However, she's grinning." "I know," he looked back at me, clearly befuddled. "I don't have the foggiest idea what's happening, all right? Also, neither does Alan. She seems as though she's smiling, and when I set her face, she returned to smiling. Her face simply does that, and we don't have the foggiest idea why." "She looks truly dreadful," he said with a smile. And afterward I saw his hand jerk towards his pocket, towards his telephone. "Don't you even contemplate snapping a photo," I raged at him. I surmised to Ben the charm of making a viral TikTok video offset the possibilities, demolishing his whole vocation. Ben left, looking disheartened. Dolt. When he was gone, I constrained myself to re-sew her mouth shut. Then I pushed the edges of her mouth down, hard, until she seemed as though she was scowling. Perhaps that was my concern last time. Perhaps I expected to set her elements in the direct inverse heading. I'm certain the family would be pissed to see her grimacing at the memorial service. However, I couldn't have cared less. Then at that point I slid her into the bureau. When the entryway shut, help overflowed me. "It's finished. I'm finished." Much to my dismay, Golden was only the start.